All right. Good evening, everybody. So this is going to be part one of a two-part presentation on a trip I took this past spring to part of the world that a lot of people probably have never been. You probably heard of Tajikistan, and I was sort of the same thing. It's like Tajikistan, like who in the heck wants to go to Tajikistan? Uzbekistan, much the same idea, I guess. But this was a tour that was recommended to me by a co-leader on a previous tour that I went on, and he'd been to Tajikistan, Uzbekistan many, many times, and said, "Oh, you really got to have the North American rock garden side to come to visit this particular part of the world." So my one of my other hats I wear these days is the tour organizer for the North American Rock Garden Society. So I contacted a company that I've worked with before, Green Tours in the UK, and through them, we sort of chatted out and we came up with a tour for Tajikistan, Uzbekistan. They normally do this tour every year anyway, so they just basically offered it a second time to accommodate our group. And so this past April, we went. I think there were 17 of us in total, so it was a fairly large group. Um, and we spent a week in Tajikistan and a week in Uzbekistan. But as it turned out, we the flights into Dushanbe, which is the capital of Tajikistan, only take place two times a week. Okay, so there's not a lot of people flying in there, at least not with Turkish Airlines that I was flying with. So I ended up being in Dushanbe for 3 days before the tour actually began. So I'm going to start off talking, showing you Dushanbe, the capital of Tajikistan. I'll give you a little bit of the cultural aspects of Tajikistan before I get into the plans. So it'll be a little bit more cultural than what I normally would do, but because it's such a bizarre part of the world that so few of us have ever seen or had any experience with, I thought you might get a better appreciation for the area. So here we are. It basically is referred to as Central Asia. Okay, so you have all the stands. You have Kazakhstan, you have Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and not even showing here because it's so tiny is Tajikistan. Okay, and stan just simply in Persian or Iranian means land. Okay, so it's the Kazakh land, it's the Kyrgyz land, it's the Uzbek land. Okay, or land of the Uzbeks if we want to look at it that way. Okay, so I'm blowing in a little bit closer. So you can see Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Afghanistan, and this little tiny country smacked and surrounded by all these other bigger countries. And here's China over here, is Tajikistan. So it's one of the smallest countries in Central Asia, and it's also considered the poorest. Um, you might think otherwise when you see what Dushanbe has to offer. Okay, so here's Dushanbe, and that's the capital. It's very, very close to the border with Uzbekistan. Tajikistan is mostly all mountains, okay? And all this whole eastern portion of Tajikistan, basically, really from the north, going right on across to all this area here is basically all impenetrable mountains, okay? Very few people are living there. The vast majority of people are living in the western part of Tajikistan, so Dushanbe, this area is to the south here. You can see that this is areas which are not as mountainous, okay? So it would be more amenable for cultivation, agriculture, things along those lines, and for people. All the eastern part is one great big massive national park. Okay, so almost half the country is a national park. So it's pretty impressive from that perspective. Okay, so blowing up even a little bit closer, sticking to the areas where I visited. Here's Dushanbe. Here's the border here with Uzbekistan. Um, and most of the areas that we visited were all in this northern part here, the Turkestan Range. Okay. That's the area where we spent most of our time botanizing. And we just did day trips. So we kept coming back to the same hotel each night in Dushanbe. And we just sort of went up the main highway, up into this area. Then there was a side road, went up to this valley and over and went up to that valley. So basically just sort of concentrated in this area here. Then at the end of the 7 days, we took the main highway, came up here, and then we came on over and entered into Uzbekistan near Samarkand. Okay, that'll be the talk for in the new year or sometime next year in 2026. I'll give you part two, which is Uzbekistan. Okay, um, first and foremost, all these countries, the stands are all Muslim. Okay, they're all Muslim countries. But interestingly, the I guess we call it the origins of the people is quite diverse. So when you're in Tajikistan, most of the population there are of Persian descent. Makes perfect sense, okay? Because that's where the home of the Muslim religion began. Strangely, Uzbekistan, which is also Muslim, are primarily Mongolians. Okay, and so you see a huge difference in the culture. They look Asian once you cross over into Uzbekistan, but in Tajikistan, they basically look like ourselves, other than the fact they just got slightly darker skin. In some cases, their skin is not even that much darker than ours. So it's quite dramatically different between these two countries in regards to the origins. Now, strangely, Tajikistan, when it comes to their culture, say the clothing of women in particular, has a very strong Indian aspect. Okay, so they oftentimes will wear very long, I don't know if you call it a dress per se, almost like a coat over matching slacks. Okay, but they're very baggy leg slacks, and all beautifully colored, lovely scarves. Of course, most of women do have their heads covered because of the fact that they are Muslim. Okay, so Dushanbe is the capital, and this was their sign that a lot of countries have. I love whatever. I love Tajikistan. I love Dushanbe. We tried to do I love St. John's or I love Newfoundland, and people got all bent out of shape over that. So, but this is what happens elsewhere in the world. All right, so originally they were their own country. And then after the Second World War, when Russia expanded, basically all the middle of Central Asia became under the rule of Russia. And then when Russia all started to fall apart again back in the, I guess what was it, the late 1980s or 1990s, um, basically they became independent again. But you will see very, very strong influence from the Russians, which did a lot of infrastructure, especially in the larger cities, not so much in the countrysides, um, back in the day. And they have a president, but he's basically a Trump. Okay, he's a dictator. Okay, let's not get too political here. But I opened up that can of worms, so I apologize for that. But essentially, you see this image of the president all over the place. Smaller towns, you will see big posters of him all over the place. Okay, so, but they all seem to love him. Okay, so you can see these buildings here, very sort of Russianish type of architecture, we'll say. And then you come to these brand new spanking buildings. It's the most, it's a city of cranes, okay? And I don't mean Desmoiselle cranes flying overhead, because we did see some of those too. But it was basically just all cranes for building, okay? So they're going through a huge building phase. You can see that the structures of the buildings are very architecturally similar. I suspect it's the same architect that's designing all these. And I should state that all this money is coming from China. Okay, so China is investing billions of dollars into Tajikistan. Tajikistan's main claim to fame, if you want to call it that, is hydroelectricity. Okay, that's about it. They don't have any oil or natural gas reserves. They have a little bit of agriculture, but it's relatively small in the big scheme of things. So their one claim to fame, because they have so many mountains, they have a lot of big rivers, and they're damming off a lot of those rivers for hydroelectricity. This is the center of power. Okay, so this is the presidential building, if you want to call it that, palace. It's more like a palace, really, but all brand new. These buildings were all built only in the last 5 to 6 years. Okay, now this is another palace called the Navruz Palace, and this one was again money from China that came in here and built this. But they call it a palace, but they also call it a tea house. And in fact, at the far end over here is a restaurant. All right, so there's a restaurant there, but then the upper levels here are often rented out for weddings, or if they have some sort of big international meetings, they will host it within this particular palace. It's quite spectacular inside. All right, this is the foyer, the entrance coming into it. That's part of our group there, just sort of looking around, thinking to themselves, what in the heck is this? This is like way beyond what we were expecting. Lots of water features. Oh my God, this is a city of fountains. It's absolutely amazing. But again, like I said, they have a fair amount of water, we'll say, from the fact that they have all these this runoff from the snows coming from the many mountains in the area. Okay, so this is all scenes of that particular palace. They have two big giant, like 30-foot high gazebos on the property there. They have a moat that goes right around the property. It wasn't filled with water at the time. They were just about getting ready to fill it up with water. In the background here, these trees you see with the white flowers, those are flowering cherries. So we were there just at the peak of the flowering, early spring season, as it turned out. So there was 3 floors to this palace, and the first floor was all wood, and except for these big massive chandeliers. But all the wood that you see in here was all handcrafted, okay? All local artisans that did this. Even the floor was all individually pieces of wood that were joined together to create this very floral uh, ideas, I guess, that you see motif around. Each of the columns here, that is the trunk of a single tree, all right? And each one of those are all hand carved, everyone being individually different, all right? Even the panels on the wall are all hand carved wood. I mean, it's the most amazing, amazing. They have such amazing artisans there. It's incredible. This is the second floor. And the second floor has a lot of wood, but it also has a lot of semi-precious stone, okay, in this particular area. So this floor here is all done with different types of tiles of semi-precious stone, a lot of it being marble, but they also have amber in there, lapis lazuli, and a few other garnets and things along those lines, okay? And you can see here is a big, huge table, the Knights of the Round Table, so to speak, I suppose, for when they're having various international functions in this particular area. So in this case right here, the columns are all made of stone, okay, as well as the panels on the wall. I mean, it's just breathtaking, really, when you see all this. And then you get to the third floor, and this is where they basically host the weddings. And here it's like a whole combination. There's carpets, there's mats, there's wood, there's semi-precious stones. Whatever they happen to have, they sort of threw into this particular area. This would be the upper area where the bride and groom, presumably it was for a wedding, would come down the staircase in to meet all the guests, okay, that were here for the wedding. Right, so you look at this, you didn't think the country was very poor, all right, in the big scheme of things. All right, now within the city itself, there's Wudaki Park. So it's this massive, massive green space in the middle of well, essentially bordering on the downtown. And our hotel we stayed at was in the downtown, so it was only like a 15-minute walk you get to this park. Now, this huge structure here, you can see a person right here, you can see a car, just to give you some scale, okay? This must be at least probably close on 100 feet tall. All right, so again, just everything's just massive, huge things there. This tower here looks very Russianish to me, but I think it's supposed to be celebrating who they consider the original founder of Tajikistan way back in the day. And this is again about 150 feet tall. This part of the park is all beautiful, planted out with different types of columnar trees, tulips, all sorts of ornamental things. These lights here, and this is a city of lights. I mean, we drove around at night, but it wasn't sensible to really take pictures, but it was worth taking pictures at night if I had the opportunity. But essentially, these lights here are supposed to be representations of the Demoiselle crane, okay? So this is a very, very fancy crane that migrates through Tajikistan in the spring and in the fall of the year. So these are the wings of the bird and the neck coming out, and then this would all light up at night. Okay, so you can sort of get the idea here of how this looks like a dancing crane. Quite large. Here's one of our people from our tour. Okay, so these structures are probably about 15 feet or so in high. Again, you can see big, fancy, high-rise buildings. This one here has actually got a tunnel that joins from this building to the next higher building to it. Again, you'd never think they were poor. This again, another big structure. All the pink you see here are flowering magnolias and tulips. Now, I should add, this whole talk and whole purpose of us going to this part of the world was to see the bulbs, okay? Tulips in particular. So a lot of our bulbs that we grow commonly in our gardens, in particular tulips, but a few of the small, lesser bulbs as well, come from this part of the world. Not daffodils. Daffodils are basically Mediterranean for the most part, okay? But tulips, this is the part of the world they come from. And in fact, the tulip is the national flower of Tajikistan. And they have a huge tulip festival every year, and we hit the nail right on the head for the blooming of the tulips. So tulips were just coming into their peak when we got there. But you can still see it's pretty early. The trees, for the most part, still have no leaves yet. Now, this was the main drag, we'll say, going through the downtown, and the main highway is just sort of off to the right. This is pedestrian walkway, quite wide. All these tunnels, and these tunnels go for kilometers. It's incredible. All lit up at night. Absolutely spectacular. And you'll see there's tulips there as well. So this is all part of the tulip festival, but not a lot of people. Incredible. It's like we saw nobody when we were there. But you can see the different styles within the tunnels. So the tunnels are one style, then they change over to this style, but they're all lit up at night. Most spectacular thing. And as I mentioned, it's the tulip festival time of the year when we were there. So just tulips and tulips and tulips and tulips. Incredible. So here we are now in the trade center, we'll say, of the downtown. Big plazas in this particular area, and there's tulips, and there's tulips, and more tulips, and even more. Okay, and it just doesn't end. And even the lights are supposed to simulate a tulip. Okay, so you get the big tall stalk, and when this lights up at night, it's almost like the goblet flowers of a giant tulip. So they love their tulips. When we came back after about a week, these tulips were gone. They were all being ripped out and all being replaced with annuals. Okay, they were in the process of planting petunias and marigolds. So it's a city of flowers. It's absolutely incredible the amount of flowers they plant and the amount of money they spend in this city for the poorest country in Central Asia in flowers. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. Well, they don't just grow tulips. This is a bed, all pansies, okay? But their winters are cold. They do get snow, not a lot. It's basically a dry cold, so sort of more like Alberta, we'll say, okay? Sort of that kind of a climate, cold but dry in the winter. But their springs come a lot earlier than ours. By March, they're getting sensible temperatures, so they can plant out their pansies in March, and they'll flower throughout March and April and into May, and then they'll be ripped out and replaced then with the annuals that can tolerate the heat of the summer. Okay. Um, but very, very fancy patterned, just very, very shallow beds. And this is just this is the main drag highway here going through town or going through the city. Now we also visit a city market, and if you want it, you can find it. It's the most incredible place. And the fruit like you've never witnessed in your life, and the largest apples and the largest oranges, not like the crap that we get in our supermarkets. And you can buy a pink grapefruit, like a huge pink grapefruit the size of my head, for like 25 cents. I mean, it's just stupid. Just how much money are the supermarkets making here in North America when you consider these people over there are getting nothing for what they're selling over there, yet they're still able to eke out a living. Spices, it's the Silk Road. The whole purpose of Europeans traveling the Silk Road back in the 12th and 13th centuries, I think of Marco Polo and whatnot, was for the spices. Okay, so they're getting access to the spices. This is part of our group right here, just admiring all the various spices that they had there. There's all the various fruit that were there, lots of fruit vendors, and they're really into nuts and dried fruit. So mostly what I bought there when I was there was dried fruit and nuts. Apricots, 4 different varieties of dried apricots. Not again, here in North America, you might be lucky enough to get 2 different varieties, but there they had 4 different varieties, all which were distinctively different from each other, but all absolutely delicious and dirt cheap. Okay, so some of the people, as I mentioned, very, very colorful. The ladies, all typical of Iranians, dark eyes, dark hair, but very, very colorful for the ladies. And even when you get out into this was in Dushanbe, but even in the countryside, in these smaller, little poorer towns, we'll say, the ladies, even the older ladies, were still dressed in traditional clothing, very, very brightly colored, absolutely beautiful, beautiful people in that regards. Men, on the other hand, much more subdued. You didn't see men going around wearing bright red clothing or yellows or pinks or nothing like that. They're all pretty subdued. And then these particular hats are very, very characteristic that most of the men would wear, even as young children in Tajikistan. So here's some just few scenes of the countryside once you get out of the main city. As I mentioned, it's very mountainous, right? So you have lots of little towns that are on the edges of the mountains in the background there. And some of the towns, once you get up into the mountains proper, they're only living in hovels. I mean, it's the most, you feel really bad for where some of the people are trying to live and how they can eke out a living in these areas, which are snowbound for months on end. It's absolutely incredible. But while we were there, we were actually invited in for a dinner, for a lunch with the locals. And essentially, they just had one great big room, excuse me, and this room was essentially a gathering space. It was like a bedroom at nighttime, but then all that was taken away in the daytime, was left open. This is all on the floor. We all had to crawl in to be here, lean up against a cushion, and then the food was basically all put in front of us. And considering these people have nothing as far as money is concerned, the layout of food that they were doing for us was absolutely amazing. Okay, they treated us like royalty. Now we also had a cooked dinner as well, a traditional dish called plav, which well consists a lot of boiled mutton. Okay, so I lost like 5 pounds or 10 pounds on this trip. I'm not a mutton fan, but it's very greasy, very horrible. But lots of fresh fruit. So as a vegetarian, you could get away without having to live on mutton in order to be able to get by. But anyway, it was interesting. I had to sit right in the very back corner because I was one of the youngest people on the tour. But even I was getting pretty stiff sitting on that floor for like 2 hours. Anyway, all right, okay. So that's a little bit of the culture. Just because it's a part of the world that most of us will never see, I thought I'd throw that in. Interesting, what you did not see, however, were any mosques. Okay. Now, once we got into Uzbekistan, we'd start to see mosques. Despite the fact that they're all Muslim in this area, they have to practice their religion in their own homes. Okay. They do not go out into large mosques where they gather in large groups of people. And in fact, younger children are not allowed to even practice the religion really until they become 18 years old. And the whole purpose of this is that they're bordering on Afghanistan, and they see all the problems that are taking place down there. And it's sort of, I guess, almost like a group mentality when you get some of these extremist groups getting together. So the country is taking upon themselves saying, well, if people can only practice it in their homes and they're not getting together in large groups, you're not going to get that extremism, we'll say. So as a result, it's a very, very quiet, unassuming country, and you never even know the people there were Muslim, other than the fact that a lot of the ladies had scarves over their heads. So it was, probably the least Muslim country that you're ever going to visit. It was a big difference once we got over into Uzbekistan, but I'll show that one now in the next talk. Okay, so we'll get into the plants. So we visited, I think it was 3 or 4 main valleys that we went up. So this is the Karatag Valley. You can still see lots of snow up in the mountains, okay? And it may be well into June or July before the snow finally melts at these higher elevations. But lower down to sort of the foothills area here, you can see there was already flowers starting to bloom. And all the yellow you see here on this hillside are all irises, and I'll show you those in a moment, okay? So this is going up the valley. You can see the trees are just starting to leaf out. So it's sort of, I guess, our equivalent to late May. I suppose we call it mid-May to early June, sort of that time of the year, we'll say. And really from the plant perspective, it was sort of that time of the year as well. All right. So again, just the first flush of the trees. This particular day was rather overcast. Most of the time we were there was just clear blue skies. But on this particular day, it was cloudy. And up in the mountains, it has a tendency to be cloudier than it does down the lowland areas. So these are the irises. And so this trip in Tajikistan, even though we were looking for tulips. Tajikistan itself, even though the tulip is a national flower, um, they don't have a lot of species. You have to really go over into Uzbekistan next door before you get into the great diversity of tulips. So I won't be showing you very many tulips in this talk. That'll be more for the next talk. But what Tajikistan has that Uzbekistan lacks are irises. So I'm sort of surprised that iris wasn't their national flower, to tell you the truth. But anyway, so this is Iris bucarica. And any plant you see with the name bucarica, because there's a number of garden plants that we grow that have the species name bucarica, that's named after Bukhara. And Bukhara is actually a World Heritage Site that we visited in Uzbekistan, the country next door. Okay, so presumably any plants that have the name Bucarica would have been close by to Bukhara, which meant that they would be native in Uzbekistan. But a number of these plants would also spill over into Tajikistan as well. Okay, so this is a bulbous type of iris, but it's not a bulb in regards to what you sometimes see here. Like you go to nurseries here and you can buy Iris reticulata, we'll say, or a Dutch iris, and that's actually a true little bulb. In this case here, it's a bulb, but it's got a very, very thick roots that come out of the bottom of the bulb. So it's a particular group of irises referred to as the Juno irises. Generally speaking, we can't grow those here in Newfoundland because we're not hot and dry enough, although this summer might have been an exception. But normally, under normal circumstances, our summers would not be hot and dry enough to keep Juno irises happy, okay? Because they'll go completely dormant by the time June rolls around in the parts of the world where they're native. But the hillsides here, hundreds of thousands of Iris bucaricas. Pretty consistent in the color for the most part. Like I said, it's just all the hills, just thousands and thousands and thousands of irises. So here's a closer view. Most of them are just pure yellow. However, we did find a few that were bicolored. Okay, and the bicolored ones are actually very, very attractive. All right, so, and some of them were pure yellow. Others had a little bit of brown stippling, we'll say, on the what we call the falls on an iris. But what also separates Juno irises is this little flap. Okay, so there's three of these little flaps that hang down on the Juno irises. You won't see that on the kind of irises that we grow here in Newfoundland. So you won't see it on versicolor or setosa or hooker eye, sorry, or even the Siberian irises that we grow in our gardens or the bearded irises. They will not have this particular flap of, I guess it's part of the petals that hangs down the flower. Okay, another bulb. This is Fritillaria bucarica. Okay, so again, we're seeing this bucarica species name popping up here and there. Now, we grow some fritillarias in our gardens. Not a lot grow well here in Newfoundland. Most of the ones that do grow well here are from Europe. We generally, again, cannot grow these Central Asian ones because we don't get hot and dry enough in the summers. And most fritillarias from Europe are sort of greenish or brownish in color, rather muted, we'll say. Whereas the ones in this part of the world are actually fairly brightly colored, okay? So this was a nice little white flowered one, quite prolific. Some had very almost like bell-shaped flowers, other more starry shape, okay? So there was some variation in how narrow the petals would be. Okay, this one here being one that has very, very overlapping, quite fat petals. Now, another bulbous plant that we, again, here in Newfoundland don't grow very well are Erameris, and they're commonly called the foxtail lily. So most foxtail lilies are usually yellow or white in color. It's very unusual to find them in pink. So this one here is sort of a fairly unique one I found in Tajikistan, Erameris albertii. Most Erameris are actually quite tall as well. They'll get up 3, 4, 5 feet. This one is quite short. This one only grows to about 2 feet in size. But you can see where they're growing right on the side of the hill. Our co-leader or our leader on this trip has been visiting this site for the last 15 years. And when he first visited this site, there were hundreds of these. And now this year when we were there were only 14 plants left. So I don't know. He doesn't know if it was climate change or it's the locals digging up the plants to grow in their own gardens or to sell, whatever the case may be. But something is definitely impacting the numbers of this particular plant. It is fairly showy. And as you can see there. So, you get an arrangement of those, it can look pretty impressive. And we do see lots of local young boys going around, in particular, with armloads of fritillaria flowers, iramuras flowers, tulips to sell to people driving by on the roads. And again, you get a big bunch of them flowers for like 25 cents. But unfortunately, it means they're raping and pillaging the countryside. But they're so poor, whatever they can make a buck on, they're going to go for it. So, as much as we're appalled by it, in some respects, we can't really expect any differently. The only consolation is that there's so many wild areas in Tajikistan that the plants themselves, the species, I'm sure are doing fine in most areas. It's just that if they happen to be growing near communities, then they're probably being negatively impacted. Okay, so here's a closer view of the flower. Very unique color. Okay, now this area has a number of anemones. Okay, and these are all bulbous anemones, or tuberous, we'll say. They do come down to a tuberous root, much similar to the anemones you buy in the super or in the nurseries around here have the tuberous roots. Okay, so this is anemone biflora. Typically, the flowers are yellow on this particular one, but later on we did come across some other different colored ones. This is Arum coral cowii. So this is in the arum family, and you just get this spathe-like flower that rises up from the foliage. Very tropical looking foliage. You see they're very happy to grow right next to a rock where they're going to get a little bit of extra heat in the spring of the year to help them to sprout a little bit earlier in the season. And then if you get any rain, the rain will get funneled off the rocks and keep the soil a little bit moister around the base of the rocks. So that seems to be where they're happiest. Now, this is another little bulb. It's called a gagia. And it's just a tiny, tiny little bulb. Most gagias have yellow flowers, a lot of different species. Very, very difficult to tell them apart. The only reason we could tell this particular one is because it's the only white-flowered one found in the country. So this is Gagia olgae. Individual blossoms there about the size of your pinky nail. Bongardia chrysogonum. Very bizarre. It's again another tuberous rooted plant. And you can see on this image here, the leaves pop up. The main root will be right here where the flower stalk is. But you'll get these leaves, and these are very thick, almost leathery in texture, and they just sit on top of the ground. But the leaves just sort of sprout up away from where the flower stalk is. So we look at that, and you never think that was a leaf that belonged to that particular flower. So it was quite bizarre in that regards. So Bongardia chrysogonum. A closer view there of the flower. Now, astragalus. There are a lot of different species of astragalus throughout the world, hundreds of species. A lot of them are very, very difficult to tell apart. They seem to be happiest in sort of climates that are similar, say, to the Midwest here in North America. Alberta points down as far as Denver. You see a lot of astragalus species. Not so many here in Newfoundland. Over there, we did see a few astragalus, most which I couldn't identify the species. This is one of the few I could. Astragalus axaricus. So a lot of astragalus are yellow. That seems to be a common color in amongst those. Okay, and these nearly stemless flowers. Paria becatovii. I guess the closest thing I can think of that we grow here would be sweet rockets. Okay, so Hesperus, sweet rockets. It's a crucifery or brassicaceae plant with these fairly large, fragrant flowers. Unlike Dame's rockets, which can sometimes be pale lavender or pale violet to deeper violet, all the Parias were almost pure white. Okay, just the buds had a little bit of a pink tint, but by the time they opened, they were almost white, maybe just a very, very subtle flush of pink on those. Geraniums. Now, we have a lot of garden geraniums that we grow. Not a lot of geraniums in this part of the world. Most of the geraniums that we grow as garden ornamentals are from Europe, especially around the Mediterranean. But they have two species of geranium over in this part of the world. This is geranium kochiana, which actually comes from a tuberous root. All right. So this is the feature that you see in this part of the world. It gets so hot and dry here in the summer, everything basically just goes brown outside of those areas that are irrigated. So these plants have to have a way to keep the moisture in those roots when they go dormant. So pretty much everything in this part of the world has a tuberous root of some form, if not a bulb. Okay, so this is a little small little geranium, Cochiana. Now this is Solenanthus caratigenus or caratigenus. Okay, I may be completely bastardizing the proper pronunciation on this. It's in the brassic, or no, it's in the Boraginaceae family. Okay, so it's related to borage. Um, but there's no petals per se. Okay, so you just get these globular heads with basically just stamens and pistils that are sticking out there. The petals are so reduced, and they're just sort of a yellowy green color. So they sort of look like little pincushions. Now, there weren't a lot of carex, not that I noticed. And the only ones we did kept seeing here and there was one actually that I could identify because I did have a guide on the flora of Tajikistan, and Carex pachystylis was listed there as being one of the more common carex. So it's a small species, grows in amongst the cracks of the rocks. Should note that most of the rocks here are limestone, and that seems to be the trend for interesting plants and bulbs of the world usually come from limestone areas. Okay, so Carex pachystylis. So that was the first valley. Now, the next day we went to the Rommet Valley. We had a sunny day there. Okay, so nice big skies. Here's one of the many big rivers that are swollen at this time of the year because of the melting of the snow in the mountains. Again, the trees are just starting to flush out. But up in the mountains, still lots and lots of snow around. Now, in this particular area, there was a little town behind us, but we had to climb up over this hillside up into these bushes, which were, I think, a type of birch, either a birch or an alder, up on his hillside. But it was all very loose gravel. It was quite challenging to get up there, to tell you the truth. And a lot of us were sort of slipping and sliding, taking one step up and sliding back down a step or two. But there was a reason why we had to go up over this slope. But first of all, before we got to that area of the steep slope, we did stop at one roadside cut. This is part of our group here. I'm sure all the locals were wondering what in the heck were we looking at. But we were all here looking at this particular plant right here, just growing in a shady nook. And that is Onosma balschuanica. Okay, so it's another member of the Boraginaceae. And it has quite spiny leaves. You can touch the leaves, but if you're somewhat sensitive, you can break out or you can get itchy. Now, it didn't seem to bother me, but there were other people in the group that after they touched the plant, they felt very prickly afterwards. So it's quite stiff hairs, we'll say, on the plants. But most anosmas usually have yellow flowers. A couple have pink, a couple have white, but yellow is by far the most common color. And you can sort of see here all these hairs, okay? And they're quite stiff. Now, also, as we're wandering up, because every time we stopped, everybody started wandering up the roadsides or wandering up over the hillsides to see what we could see. So as we're walking along, someone spotted this little touch of pink on the side of the cliff. And this was a plant called Pseudosedum longidentatum. Okay, so here it is here. So it looks very much like a sedum. Pink flowers, succulent leaves on it, but it's not a true sedum. Okay, so they call it pseudosedum or false sedum. And of course, being a sedum, it'd be very drought tolerant. So that's fine, Danny, that could grow on these cliffs that might not get rain for months on end. Now, also growing on the cliff face here was another pea relative called Chesnea hisarica. Beautiful silvery foliage, and that's a good adaptation for drought. Now, ferns, this is not the place to come for ferns, okay? The only fern that we did come across fairly regularly, and it's one that's quite drought tolerant, is Usperangium persicum. It used to be called Chelanthus persicum, but it's been moved to a new genus now. But very, very almost leathery foliage, and it can completely dry up during the dry season, and then all the fronds are sort of shrivel up. But then as soon as the rain hits it, those fronds seem to swell up again. So sort of call it a resurrection plant if you want it. Okay, so we were seeing more bulbs in this area as we were heading further up into the mountains. Now, I looked at this and I said, oh, it's a pushkinia. I grow that in my own backyard. Although it looked, the leaves were probably a little bit broader than what the most of our pushkinias we grow. But it's called Phaesia pushkinioides. Okay, so it is the Phaesia that looks like a pushkinia. Now, Phaesia, how that separates from a scilla, I have no idea. Okay, there were some scillas in this part of the world, but most of what I always thought of as scillas, they call Phaesia. Okay, so maybe it's a recent split. But most of these Phaesias, the flowers were either white, uh, pale blue, or sometimes you saw some that were deeper blue in color. Okay, but most of them were sort of this white color with beautiful blue stamens. Now, this was another Phaesia, Vidinskii, which is deeper blue. Again, why is it not a Scilla? Okay, I have Scillas in my backyard. It looks so much looks so similar to this. Okay, um, Vidinskii, I think I'm not sure how you pronounce two V's. It's Russian. Okay, he was a famous Russian botanist that spent a lot of time in Central Asia. So we have a number of bulbs are named after him. And there's a closer view of the flower there. Okay, again, beautiful blue stamens. All right, viola. Hey, a plant that we all can recognize. All right, so we had no problem recognizing this one when we were there. This is Viola suavis. It was the only violet that we saw on the entire trip. But typical violet, nice little blue flowers, not unlike cuculata that we grow ourselves. Gagias, as I mentioned, a lot of different species. Mostly are yellow, and it's really difficult to tell the various species apart. They differ primarily in where is the leaf joined to the flower stem, or are the leaves broad like they are in this particular species? Are they more grass-like on this particular one? There is a little bit of variation in the shape of the flowers, some being more rounded petaled, some being more pointy petaled. Okay, I'm not going to get swamped into the different species of gagias that we saw on the trip. But again, it's just a bulb. With small flowers about the size of your pinky nail. Now, this is Gymnospermium darwasica, and it's a member of the Berberis family. Okay, so it's related to barberry. Um, and epimedium, if you're familiar with barrenworts that we grow as a garden plant. Okay, so that's in the same family as well. So gymnospermiums, the flower, as soon as the leaf breaks the ground, you get the unexpanded leaf, and then the flowers come open. And then after the flowers have faded, then the leaf gets much, much larger, very, very proliferous, we'll say. Not, yeah, very leafy, we'll say, okay, afterwards. But in the spring of the year when they first bloom, not much of the leaves. And of course, that helps for the pollinators to find the flowers because you don't have a lot of leaves getting in the way. Now, back to the irises again. This is Iris vicaria, which is a white-flowered species, closely related to Bucarica. Again, see these little flaps hanging down. That's what separates the Juno irises from the irises that we're more familiar with. Okay, here's a classic. All right, so we have our falls here, our standards. In fact, I think these are the standards. Okay, if I'm not mistaken, these are the standards. In this case, they hang down as opposed to sticking up. Because normally the standards would hang above the reproductive structures, and this is the reproductive structure here on these irises. Okay. And sometimes in the Ficaria, you'll find some that are very, almost an ice blue, just a very, very subtle tint of blue in the flowers. Now, that big steep slope I was telling you about with all the loose rock, we had to hike up over that to find another iris called Iris rosenbachiana. Here it is here. One of the smaller ones, but again, it's another Juno. Here's our standards hanging down here. Okay, but more brightly colored, okay? And a lot of variation in the patterning of the white with the maroon and the purple and whatnot. But it's a very short iris. It's maybe, I don't know, maybe 10 to 15 centimeters in height. Okay, whereas the other irises were getting up probably better part to 30 centimeters in height or more. Okay, so again, a lot of variation in the colors, but all would have these dark purple tips on the reproductive structures. Okay, now Corydalus or Corydalis, however you want to pronounce it, it's another tuberous species, Lida boreana. We saw these all over the place. We saw them in the lowland areas. We saw them high up in the mountains. A lot of variation in the shade of pink between them. They're related to Dicentra, bleeding hearts. Okay. And they have these beautiful, almost blue-green, in some places very blue tinted foliage, quite succulent. But again, they will completely disappear during the summer months. And these big long spurs, and that's where the nectar would be. So when the bees would visit these, they'd stick their tongues right up to the back end here in order to get access to the nectar. Okay. Now, so next valley we went up brought us to the Newark Reservoir. All right. So here's the big reservoir here. This is part of that's being some of the many rivers that are being dammed off for hydroelectricity. But you'll notice this line on the hills. Okay. This is how far down the water levels are. It's actually quite appalling when you think about it, because this is in the spring when this reservoir should be at its max. Okay. The water level should be up at the top. This is literally 100 feet or more down for the level of water. Okay. They are in a severe drought situation. You can see here all the orchards. Okay. So these all had to be irrigated during the summer. And now the water levels, and that's drinking water as well. Um, it's serious. It is serious. So many parts of the world are going through droughts, and we know what it's like ourselves this year. We experienced it a bit, here in Newfoundland. But you can just see here how dramatically low the reservoir was. Anyway, so here's one of the little towns. The wild cherries and wild apples. I should note the ancestor to the apple comes from Tajikistan. Okay, so that's where the apples originated. Here's part of the orchards as we're going by. I think the main plant that we're seeing in bloom were apricots. Okay, we're seeing lot. They grow a lot of apricots, peaches, plums. So all the standard stone fruits, we'll say for the most part. We did see a few insects, not a lot. This was a little one of the little blue butterflies. Okay, when the wings open are bright blue. When they close up, they almost disappear. Lots of crickets around doing their thing. Now, on some of the hillsides here, you can see the hills look like they've been mowed. Well, they have been, but they've been mowed by sheep. As I mentioned, the national dish is boiled mutton. All right, so they love their sheep there. So there's a big problem with overgrazing by sheep. Okay, and we experience that in many areas of Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. But what you're seeing here on this hillside are all these bushes with these beautiful purple flowers. So it was quite dramatic in the areas that had been shorn basically by the sheep to see these trees and the bright purple flowers. All right. You can see some of the sheep here in the background and goats and some cattle. But this is a plant called cercis, which is commonly called the red bud. So they produce their flowers right off the bare stalks. And then after the flowers have faded, then your foliage comes out. Beautiful foliage, very, very round leaves on this particular plant. Okay. But it's a very dramatic plant, very prolific for flowers. So it really stood out at the time of the year. And we just hit the nail right on the head for the best time of the year to catch the red buds in full bloom. We did see a maple, Acer capodosicum. Um, Again, I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly. It's one of the smaller type of maples, very, very dainty foliage, somewhat reminiscent of a Japanese maple in that regards. But you can see the little yellow flowers that were on those as well. Now, we did come across another anemone. Before we had anemone biflora with the yellow flowers. Now we're into anemone bucarica. Here we go, bucarica again, which have these orangey red flowers. Okay, so another little tuberous rooted anemone. Here you can see a little cricket in the center of the flower there. And every once in a while you would come across one that was more yellowy in color. All right, so yellow to orange to red on anemone bucarica. And then another anemone, and I'm not even going to bother to try to pronounce this one, which has got white flowers, which is a hint of pink in the center, quite pretty, a little small one. This was quite common as well. And if you're really lucky, you come across a hybrid between this anemone and anemone bucarica, which ends up being the deeper pink. Okay, so I only found one of the hybrid on this entire hillside. Okay, Adonis annua. another anemone relative, okay, another buttercup relative. And this is one of the very few annual species that we saw. So, um, tells you how early their spring are, that the first annuals were already coming into bloom at the in the middle of April. Now back to the bulbs again. This is Bellavalia turkistanica from Turkmenistan, basically for the most part, but extending right into Tajikistan as well. And Bellavalia is very, very closely related to muscari, the grape hyacinths that we grow in our own gardens. The main difference is that grape hyacinths have more globular flowers. Bellavalias have more angular or angled flowers. So they're sort of in cross section, more triangular in outline as opposed to being a globe. But very dark, dark blue, almost a blue black, quite striking. Now, another astragalus, you'd walk past it, not even notice it. Astragalus viridiflorus, which means green flowered. And sure enough, the flowers are as green as the leaves. Okay, you can see the leaves here. Actually, the leaves are very, very fine, very, very narrow foliage for considered or compared to most astragalus that we normally would see. But again, the flowers just dark, dark green. They just sort of blended in, and how insects, pollinators found them is beyond me. Now, this was really outstanding plant. Eminium albertii. It's another arum, okay? A dark, dark purple, black flowers. And here's the foliage. There's like two leaves popping off, fairly small at this stage. After the flower has faded, these leaves will get quite large. This entire plant smells of rotting flesh, okay? It's fly pollinated. All right, so you don't want to stick your nose in her. Enjoy them from a distance, but it's a very, very striking plant. And just see how black, I mean, it's incredible. Again, coming down to a tuberous root. Okay, another Aramirus, a foxtail lily. As I mentioned, most foxtail lilies usually have flowers that are white or yellow and are usually tall. Compared to the first one we saw, Albertii, with the pinkish flowers, which was quite short. This one here, Siu Warriowii, is a much taller, more classic foxtail lily. Again, coming from a bulb. Now, Hypogomphia bucarica. Here's another bucarica. It's the fourth bucarica plant. It looks superficially almost like a dactylorhiza orchid, but it's actually a member of the mint family. Okay, so it's related to Stachys, from as being a fairly common, or lamium, in that regard. So the foliage is a bit rank smelling, but the flowers themselves do look somewhat reminiscent of a dactylorhiza orchid. Now, this is another iris. However, this iris is more like our typical irises, okay? The standards, instead of being these little three flaps hanging down, actually stand up and are quite striking in their coloration, okay? These are the falls. Falls have this beard, okay? And that beard is what attracts the pollinators because they think that's stamen full of pollen. In fact, they're not, because the stamens are right here, hidden away. All right, so this is Iris lineata, which means it's a striped iris. So quite striking, but more closely related to our types of irises that we grow. Now we found another anosma here, irritans, and you can see all those white stiff hairs, which can be very irritant-y, irritable if you get it on your touch it with your skin. Okay, so anosma irritans. Another Gagia. This one we could identify no problem, Gagia gagioides, because it actually reproduces itself by these little bubblets. Okay, so you look on the stem there, you can see these sort of little reddish round dots. They will fall off the plant, roll around in the wind and the rain, and then take root, and the plant propagates itself. Okay, so it's one of the few Gagias which is easy to identify. A dandelion. No one could tell me what species it was, okay? But it was a dandelion, all right? So it was a roadside weed. Now, then we went to the Ansop Pass. That was the highest point for this entire trip. We were well up into the snow range here. And we actually crossed over the top of this range. I'm not sure what the elevation. I suspect the elevation was probably around 7,000 feet, give or take. But like I said, we were right up into the snow in these areas here. Here we are wandering around. Here's the snow coming right down. Here's the snow right in front of us. The sky looked very threatening, very, very gray. It wasn't actually that cold. I say the temperature was probably around 12 or 13 degrees. So, for me, it felt like a nice spring day. For the Americans that were there, they were frozen for the most part. But we're looking around here, you say, what in the heck are you going to see in this? It looks like there's absolutely nothing there, right? It's pretty bleak. Not a leaf on the trees. There was a little touch of green starting to come around, though, at the base of the valleys. But here was the snow, like coming right down to us. This would have been one of the avalanche areas during the winter months. And you're saying, like, why? Like, what are you looking for in this area? It's just like so bleak, so bleak. But we're looking for crocuses. And even here in Newfoundland, crocuses bloom within a few days of the snow melting, right? And so that's what crocuses do. Even where they're wild, they typically grow at the edges of the melting snow. So they're the first touch of color. Any early emerging bees that come out, they will get, they will just, this will be a bullseye for them. So these plants get pollinated very, very readily because it's the only source of nectar or pollen for these early emerging bumblebees for the most part. So this is Crocus coral cowii, typical yellow crocus. And we're seeing these here. You can see a little solitary bee in the middle of that flower there, gathering the pollen, gathering some nectar. And then growing right next to them and looking very similar was a completely unrelated plant called Colchicum luteum, luteum meaning yellow. So this is a yellow colchicum, and we think of colchicums as being the autumn crocus. We grow them here in the botanical garden. And most colchicums usually have flowers that are different shades of pink. But this is a yellow, one of the rare yellow flowered ones, and it blooms in the spring as opposed to the fall. And they grow side by side with that Crocus coral cowii, because basically they're aiming to attract the same pollinators. Okay, so it looks similar. Bumblebee flying by doesn't care which one's going to. It's a yellow flower in an otherwise very brown landscape. But again, this is a bulbous plant. We were lucky enough to find one white flowered one. All right, now also growing up through the rocks here, and again, it's usually in amongst the rocks because of the fact the rocks would absorb a little bit more heat, was another species of Gymnospermium, Gymnospermium albertii. In the back right here, you can see these big fat buds just breaking the ground. That's another species of Arameris, foxtail lily. So this area would be spectacular in, I would say, like the latter part of May when all these come into flower. But at this time of the year, they're just starting to break the ground at that stage. Okay, so there's the flowers of the Gymnospermium. And a closer view there. It's actually a very, very attractive flower. I don't think anyone's growing it in cultivation, though. Okay, so here's more of that Corylus Lita boreana. And again, you just sort of see variation in the color of the flowers. But basically, all different shades of pinks and reds and whites or combinations. And it's beautiful, somewhat succulent blue-green foliage. Okay, so as we're heading back down off the hill, we came across more Iris vicaria, which are these really ice blue type coloration. Again, now our falls are hanging down because we're back to being a Juno iris. Now, there were more Bucarica, Iris bucaricus in this area as well. All right, that was the hillsides I showed you at the very beginning. That was all full of yellow irises. So this particular valley had lots of these irises as well. But what was interesting in this is the only valley where we came across it, you get the hybrid between Vicaria and Bucarica, which is this one right here, which is sort of this creamy yellow, very, very pale yellow flower. Okay, so that's a naturally occurring hybrid between those two previous species of iris. Now we found a little honeysuckle, just a little shrub honeysuckle, Lonicera microphylla. Small leaves, small flowers, but typical of honeysuckles, you have two flowers. They will come back to a double stuck together ovary. Okay, so that when the fruit forms, you get this little two-eyed berry, little two-eyed reddish colored berry. No fragrance on this particular one. So it's one of the species of bush honeysuckle. Ceratocephalum falcatum. This is in the buttercup family. Okay, it would look very low and mossy type growth. I almost thought it was a mossy saxifrage when I first saw it, but then when you look at the flowers close up, you can see it's like a very, very miniature version of a buttercup. All right, and that entire plant is, oh my gosh, maybe 3 centimeters high. Okay, it's pretty tiny, pretty tiny. A rhubarb. Okay, so our rhubarb comes from this part of the world. Now, this is not the same species of rhubarb that we grow, but it's a different species, Rheum maximo-wixii. Um, and most of the plants just produce these two very, very bristly leaves, not particularly large, not like our rhubarb. And then in the center, you get this flower stalk, this sort of brownish reddish flower stalk will come up later in the season. Okay, but we were seeing locals selling rhubarb on the side of the road. Okay, because I guess that would be the first crop they would get for the season. And their rhubarb looked much like ours, but this flower stalk, the leaf stalks are much shorter than what we grow. But this is a wild species of rhubarb. And we had a valerian, okay, Valeriana cyanophylla. Typical of valerians, the flowers is pale pink, very, very fragrant. But some people like the fragrance and some people don't. Some people say it smells like cat's piss. I didn't find the smell that bad, to tell you the truth. But I know sometimes valerians can have a somewhat disagreeable odor, we'll say. So we did come across a valerian growing quite high up in the elevation there. And another species of Solananthus, I showed you the one before that had looked like a pincushion with the round flowers. This is a more spike form, okay? A different species with a more of a spike arrangement of flowers. But again, no stigmas or no petals to speak of. It's just stamens and stigmas all sticking out of the flowers. And finally, on this particular mountainside, we came across the first tulips. Okay, so this is Tulipa turkestanica. I actually grow this one in my own garden, and it grows quite well for me. But this is a tulip from very, very high elevation, so they're not going to get. They make it dry in the summer, but it's not going to be bakingly hot. Okay, because we're talking about an elevation here of 6, 7,000, 8,000 feet. So their summers may be dry, but relatively cool. So they seem to do okay in our climate as a result of that. Okay, so Tulipa turkestanica, beautiful bicolored white flowers with the yellow center and this very narrow, somewhat wavy foliage. Another view there, you can see the foliage here is beautiful. It's really dark purple edge to the wavy edged leaves. So Tulipa turkestanica and Tulipa praestans, another one that we can grow. Okay, and it's one the nurseries sell this one. Now, normally what the nurseries sell of this particular species, they have 2 or 3 flowers together in a cluster, all right, under one stem. But all the ones that we saw over here were all just single flowered, okay? But otherwise, the flowers were typical of a praestans that we can grow here as a garden ornamental. And these in our own gardens will multiply and grow quite happily. Again, it's a tulip from very, very high elevations, and therefore they don't bake hot in the summer, and therefore we have a fighting chance of growing this particular tulip in our own gardens. So it was sort of neat to see these tulips that I'm growing in my own garden growing in the wild. Okay, and it sort of gives you a better appreciation of how these plants actually do their thing in the wild. So with that, there, as you can see, the beautiful black stamens in the middle of the flowers on the praestans. But that is the end. Okay, part 2 in the winter. I will go to Uzbekistan, a lot more tulips there, few more irises, bunch of other kind of bulbs as well, more tulips, or more crocuses as well. And but we will see mosques. We'll see lots of mosques. We'll see lots of spectacular architecture in this part of the world. And there are several UNESCO World Heritage Sites there, this part of the world, based upon the cultural aspects and some of the old existing buildings. This one right here is called the Registan, and Tajikistan dates back into the 13 and 1400s. Okay, so it's quite old structures. Um, anyway, I'll get into more of that on the next talk. All right, so I will close that out.
Well,
And
wow.
if
Todd,
you have
thank you.
questions,
That's fantastic. So many beautiful flowers. It's hard to take in that many.
well, Uzbekistan had even more. I
Wow.
got to be a little bit more selective for Uzbekistan.
Well, Todd, I got to tell you, you outdid yourself again. I wanted to ask you, when I look at the height of the hills, and you did say that you were the youngest of the group. How was the walking those trails? It looked like it was a tough slog, like rocky. I always think, could I do it? Did you find it?
Yeah, it was it in some places. In some places, we just botanized alongside the road. That was perfectly fine.
Okay.
There was a couple of spots where we had to do a little bit of hoofing. There were a couple of spots. Literally, there was one spot I could not get to. Some people did. I didn't take heavy hiking boots with me. I only just had like, sort of those hiker sneakers type of thing. Um, and there were old ones that didn't have much grip. They were pretty bald on the bottom, and I just could not get up over the slippery slope in one particular spot. So I did miss out on I'm not sure what it was. It was a bulb of some sort. I'm not sure it was a tulip. It might have been a tulip that I missed. I just could not get there. I could not get there. And there was another hillside that it was challenging. I did get there. I was sort of disappointed when I did get there because we were there looking for an
Yeah.
iris, and it was another Juno iris, but the flower was the most unattractive shade of yellowy muck. I can't
Yeah.
describe it as anything else. But anyway, the guy said, "Oh, you got to come up and see this iris. It's a very special iris." I was like, "Yeah, well, they're special
Yeah.
and they're special." So, but I hoofed it up, and I had to basically come down off the hill on my arse. Okay,
Yeah.
so it was challenging. So, now Uzbekistan. No, Uzbekistan had a couple of challenging spots as well. I'll
Yeah.
show you one. Oh my God. We went up in the ski hill area and it was brutal, brutal. There was one lady, we did not think we were going to be able to get her up. She got down to the bottom of the hill and not realizing that she'd had to hike back up over the top of that hill.
Oh,
Um, and we basically had to go down with water for her. And we took quite a while to get her back up over that hillside. So this was probably the most vigorous tour that I've been on yet when it comes to
wow, it
botanizing.
looks like
Most of my tours have been usually pretty easy, but that one was challenging. Now
yeah.
we're going back. Well, we're going to Morocco and Crete this
Oh,
March and April. It's another tour, so I'll be showing you lots of pictures of that part of the world now in the future. But hopefully, I think those areas are not going to be as challenging to do.
oh,
That's my hope at any rate, because I know like to the average age of these people are up in their 70s. They're all retirees for the most part.
um,
And I was amazed. Some of these people, there was one lady, she was in her 80s and she hiked up over that hill
God
she
love
never had
her.
a, yeah, and she never had a worry in the
Yeah,
world,
wow. That
right?
encourages
But,
me.
Todd,
right.
Todd,
But,
I want to see you rolling down that hill. Like, how come there's no pictures of you coming down the hill on your bum? Come on. I mean, we'd all love to
well,
see that,
there
right?
is a friend of mine, because there's a good friend of mine from Calgary that was on that trip, and she got pictures of me coming down on my arse, but I never bothered to put those in.
Oh no, tell her we want to see him. We want to see him. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
That
Todd,
rose,
Todd,
sorry.
you may know this. I had the pleasure of working in Uzbekistan
Oh,
um, 10
wow.
years, a little more, maybe 12 years ago. Um, and it's changed in the sense that China was just coming in at that point, and spending a lot of money. And now I see it's really come in.
Oh,
The
Mm.
reason that Tajikistan is poor is because there is no way they can earn money. The Russians are still in control. And if you
Oh,
travel to any of the former Russian countries, you'll see like Chechnya, or Dagestan, the Russians still have total control, and they'll put up these fancy buildings. So it looks like it's good,
Mm.
but in fact, the people have nothing, absolutely
Mm.
nothing. But now, and that the Russians have been very worried about the Chinese coming in as they are. Uzbekistan is very different. It got
Mm.
away from the oligarchy. The second ruler, the first ruler was appointed by Russia. The second is really one of the Western world thinkers. And they have a very good economy. And in fact, The Economist
Yep.
magazine, about 3 years ago, cited Uzbekistan as one of the most successful countries. Now they've backslided a bit now, but I don't want to take over from you, but I'll just give you a little context.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
great to hear that
and you'll
news.
see that too now when you see the next
Yeah,
presentation, just how much. And Uzbekistan's got natural gas too, right?
yes, they
So
do.
they have a good source of money there compared to Tajikistan, right?
They're
Mm.
also a huge producer of cars as long as you want a white car.
Yeah,
You,
white cars, that's the thing. You know you're in Uzbekistan because everything is white cars.
you have to pay extra, a lot of extra to get a different color.
Yeah.
Are they Chinese cars, EVs?
No, no, they
Um,
make them there.
Oh, they make them. Oh,
Yeah, they
Yeah,
make them there. But interestingly, what I didn't mention in Tajikistan, specifically in Dushanbe, every cab, and there was a lot of cabs, were all electric. They're all Chinese electric cars,
wow.
wow.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, much more than what we see around here. You might see a scattered electric car, but every single cab, and that was probably the most common car on the road in Dushanbe itself, were cabs, and they're all electric.
Wow. Impressive. Mhm.
Do 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 they export any bulbs at all?
I don't think, because all those tulips that they were planting around the city for their tulip festival, they're all coming from Holland.
Oh my God.
Right? Those are all standard everyday tulips that we buy, like
Yeah.
when we go to the stores, right?
So
And
sad.
yeah. So, now, to my knowledge, I mean, there may have originally been ones being shipped out from there, but I don't think there's being much done over there these days as far as anyone
Yeah.
locally growing bulbs for export. There were a lot of orchards. I know when you get into Uzbekistan, there was a lot of cotton originally. That's what the Russians,
Yeah.
uh, that was their big thing over there was cotton, which unfortunately is very bad for the environment and leads to desertification or desert whatever the
Yeah.
word is.
Mhm.
Yeah, so a lot of the land ended up becoming infertile and washing away, and yeah, it was just a god awful thing.
Yeah,
But Uzbekistan now is,
the government is wanting to get rid of it completely.
yes,
When I was
and they're
there,
doing a lot of work now to try to revive natural vegetation in these areas that were wiped out by the cotton growing.
mm,
Hmm.
and the RLC was wiped out. And
Yep.
then RLC was the water. They just dried it right up, but the water was to for the cotton industry.
Mhm.
Yep.
Now there's no RLC. Yeah,
No.
Mhm. Amazing.
Yeah, a lot of bad things have happened, but it seems like Uzbekistan now is trying their best to try to start to undo a lot of the Russian damage that had taken place there.
yeah, yeah, very much so. Certainly, I mean that's been going on, so it's good to hear. I'm
Mm.
glad you have the
Mhm.
update that it's getting better. Yeah.
So,
I recommend everybody to go to Uzbekistan. Um, and there's extraordinary art there. It's a wonderful place to visit, very safe. A lot of
Mhm.
French go there too. It's a
Mhm.
safe
Yeah,
country.
it's a very safe place because their police will say don't tolerate very much. Um, so, and even Tajikistan in Dushanbe itself was, people could park their cars without even locking their doors because there's cameras everywhere. Everybody
Mhm.
knows what you're doing.
Mhm.
Um, it might not be the same once you get into the countryside, but in Dushanbe itself, in the downtown areas, there are just cameras everywhere. So, crime is very, very low as a result.
Mhm.
I think Tajikistan is one of the prettiest of the uh,
Definitely.
Silk Road.
Now I tell you, I want to get to Kyrgyzstan because they have spectacular, even more spectacular plants there. So in a couple of years from now, I'm going to try to organize a trip to that part of the world.
Let me
Their
know.
neighbor.
Let me know, Todd, too. Todd, I wanted to ask you about the Iris Rosenbacher. Is it Baca? You went up the hill to this Iris Rosen,
The
Rosen.
Rosenbachiana, yeah.
Yeah, was that rare? Because that was gorgeous. Was that rare?
Well, I don't know how rare any of these particular plants are. Interestingly, outside of the Iris bucarica, which we saw in several different places, most of these plants we end up only seeing in the one site that we went to look for them, right? So whether or not they are rare, or it's just that this is one of the areas that's easy to access that particular plant, right? And it wasn't very easy to access that one because that was quite a climb, clambering up over that hillside as well to see that particular iris. But I'm going to assume I see no reason why these plants wouldn't be more widespread. But as I mentioned, so much of Tajikistan is just not accessible by people, right? All the people are concentrated in the very eastern part of the country, close to Dushanbe and any of the outlying areas there, which is basically where the main agricultural areas, we'll say. Most of the country is just all mountains, and you just have these little isolated little villages where it might only be 3 or 4 families growing there.
Yeah.
Todd, I wanted to ask a question about the plant that you smelled like rotting flesh.
Oh yes, yeah.
Emininium.
Eminimium. I can't even pronounce it, but anyway.
A couple of greenhouses in the world seem to have these plants that every year they,
Yep.
or every so often. Is it similar to that?
It's related. It's distantly related to those. Those are what do they call them? A Maphothalus or something like that is the
really
big ones you
tall,
see.
big.
The carrion flower or whatever you see in these botanical gardens. So it's related to that. So there are a lot of arum type flowers which produce these calla lily like flowers. Especially if their flowers are somewhat brown or green, they usually smell of rotting flesh to attract flies. So that seems to be a common feature. When we were in Uzbekistan, we found another species. It looked very, very similar. Basically, the only difference was the shape of the leaves. The flowers are basically identical to the one we saw in Tajikistan. So there are several different species throughout Central Asia in that genus, which typically have these dark maroon, brown flowers that stink of rotting flesh.
Yes.
I just checked out. Tajikistan has a population of 5 million, which is actually bigger than one would think.
Yeah.
But I would say that probably it's sort of like St. John's, right? Half the population probably lives in the Dushanbe
Exactly. Yeah.
area, right?
Yeah. But Uzbekistan has almost the same population as Canada.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Really surprising.
Yeah. They're very packed close together. I mean, there's still lots of wild areas between the towns, but once you got into a city or a town, the people were packed together like sardines.
Todd, those two anosmas that you showed,
Yep.
this might be silly, but are they related to Gall of the Earth when you look at them? They just look like no, okay.
No, they'd be.
The way they hang
I guess
down.
yeah, but comfrey. If you're familiar with comfrey,
okay. Yes, okay.
yes. So they're more closely related to comfrey.
Okay.
Yeah.
Todd, did you see any animals or,
No, only animals we saw were goats and sheep and cows.
Yeah, domestic.
No, it was domestic. We never saw anything wild, and even bird-wise, it was not good. Now, we were there early. I think a lot of the migrants had not arrived yet. We were seeing a few birds of prey flying overhead. I think they were again in migration as well, but they're pretty high up. We could see there were some hawks and there were some vultures and that flying around. But when it came to like land birds, very, 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 very few. I was very, very disappointed from a birding perspective. I don't think I might have added 5 new birds to my world list. That was it, and I thought I was going to see a heck of a lot more.
Mm.
So, yeah, I know the focus was plants, but still,
Sure.
other places where I go, I see plants, but then you will see birds flying back and forth, right? But no, very, very, very few for birds.
Mm.
Mhm.
And the drought was so amazing.
Yes.
Even
Oh
the
my gosh.
soil of the plants seems to be dry.
Yeah, I mean, when we saw the reservoir, it was striking. I mean, like I said, literally, the water level had to be down close to 100 feet below to where it should be. Now that reservoir must be quite deep in some respects based on that, but um, still, they've been having a lack of snow in the mountains and like virtually no rain at all in the summers over the last few years. So, these plants, we don't know what the long-term repercussions are. The country seems to be becoming more deserted as time goes by, right? So,
Right.
whether or not that stays, maybe 5 years from now, they'll have flood situations. Who knows, right? Because the way the climate goes around the world these days, it goes from one extreme to the other.
That's right.
Crazy. Well, it was a wonderful presentation.
It was
And
superb.
thank you so much, Todd, and thank you everybody for coming.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Thank you, Susan, for filling us in too about,
yes,
Yeah.
Yes, I was delighted, Susan, that
very
you
helpful.
that
Yeah.
you
Oh,
joined
I'm
in.
so envious. It was probably one of the best part of my working life was working over there. Yeah.
Fabulous.
No, I must say I did love Tajikistan. I liked it more than Uzbekistan. Like I said, there was more of a wildness to it. Uzbekistan, and again, I'll get into it more in the next talk, is starting to become very commercialized. And they're starting to get a more touristy. But the problem is that they're attracting tourists without protecting what they have. And so what's happening is that a lot of these ancient structures and ancient buildings they have are starting to get worn away much more quickly than they should be because there's too many tourists coming in and they're not doing enough protection for protecting the buildings and the landscapes and whatnot. So it was a bit disheartening to see that taking place in Uzbekistan. Tajikistan, like there's no tourists worthwhile there. And while we were there, we actually did have, when we were in the downtown core, there was a gentleman there, him and a cameraman were there, and they saw us. He spoke broken English, and he asked us, said, we're doing a tourism film for Tajikistan. And he said, you're obviously tourists, right? I mean, obviously we'd stick out like sore thumbs. And we said, yes. And he said, do you mind if we interview you? So he ended up interviewing all of us on the tour individually and asking us, why you were coming to the country, where you were from, and how did you hear about Tajikistan and all this kind of stuff. So maybe somewhere over there, they're showing an ad with us in it.
I
But
was
they
ready.
were all quite amazed that we were there to look at their flowers.
Yeah.
Like
Was
they
it-
couldn't fathom that.
Was there liquor available with your meals? Was there liquor? No?
Did we have no?
No.
Well, you could buy. We never had liquor for the most part with the meals. I can't say that there was any liquor over there that I could really rave about. I can't rave about the food either, to tell you the truth. It wasn't that great in the big scheme of things. But anyway, it is what it is, right? Uzbekistan, the food was better there because they're much more westernized, we'll say, than Tajikistan. Tajikistan, we had a lot of local food, but I don't think I would lose a lot of weight if I lived there.
It's beautiful. Beautiful.
I would agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but in Uzbekistan, the crafts and the silk, embroidery, all of that is still going on there. That's
Oh my God,
stunning.
yes. I mean, and there was people on our tour when we're on the Uzbekistan side, that went home with hundreds of dollars worth of silk, for the most part, like some cases were mats, some cases was just the material, so they can make their own dresses when they get back to the States or whatever. The only thing I bought there, I did buy a pelosham, that was done by the local artisans there in one of the little markets we went to, just because I don't have much room in my house for more stuff. I'm trying to get rid of stuff. So,
Yeah.
but I think I had the cushion, and my Chesterfield was blue, and this one right here had a sort of a flower and a bird motif, albeit very stylized, but it was blue and white. So I said, well, at least we'll match the Chesterfield. So,
My living room is straight from Uzbekistan.
oh really? Oh wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
because that's where I'm just forgetting the name of the silk that you bought, but it originates so there.
Hmm.
And it's a particular pattern that, oh, I can't remember the name of it now. But anyway, that's what I brought back all and had them made here.
Yeah, and they have a particular style. You can
Yeah,
tell
yeah.
the silk goods that are made in Uzbekistan.
ECAT, that's what it's
Yeah,
called.
okay. Is it
ECAT.
okay?
Yeah.
And they did a lot of stuff with metal work too. Some very, very distinctive metal work over there. And a lot of metal artisans. So they would do like metal bowls and things like
Ah,
that. No.
I missed that.
Oh, okay.
Phew.
Well, I think we should probably clue up, but Todd, we look
Yep.
forward to us.
Yeah, so part
Staying
two.
Your
Okay.
next one, and whenever that's going to be. Thank you so
Yeah,
much
I
tonight.
can't remember. Why did we decide on that, Carm?
I can't remember.
Sometime the winter.
To be continued.
I think
To be
March.
continued.
I think March. Anyway.
Oh, okay. Fair
Listen,
enough.
thanks, Todd.
Okay,
Thanks,
no
Lisa.
problem.
Yeah,
And thanks,
All right.
Karen.
yeah, yeah.
And
Thank you,
Ann, thanks.
everybody, for
Thank
coming.
you.
It's great.
All right,
Bye-bye.
folks.
Yeah.
Thanks very
Take
much.
care,
We'll talk to you
everyone.
later.
Have a
It
good
was
Christmas.
great.
Yes,
Bye.
good
Yes,
Christmas.
Christmas.
Right.